Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I'm very excited. I was already teasing Shaun just a second ago, so everyone's smiling. It makes me feel good. Now, while I'm teasing everybody, I want y'all, make sure you hit the buttons. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff so you can get your email in the mornings whenever we go live, which is, of course, every day. If you have any questions or comments at all for anything we're talking about, by all means, put them in the comments section and we can engage them just like this. Salty Jinx pumps in before Winter Storm chimes in. Good morning, guys. Morning, Salty Jinx. Eric Lister jumps in. Good morning. It's Salty. Salty's good morning. There we go. We got some back and forth in the comments.
The game is already afoot.
It is beginning. Now, Craig, it's been a while. Really appreciate you being on here. Do you want to give us another 30, 45 seconds who you are, where you come from? And then we can jump right into the combo.
So I'm a former Navy SWIC, which is a little special ops unit in the U.S. Navy that drives around in pointy little boats and harasses fishermen. After that, I was in the State Department's Personal Protective Service, basically like a glorified bodyguard for people in Iraq, and did some private military work outside of that. My business partner and I co-wrote a book on training special operations personnel or training people for special ops selection. The book's called Building the Elite, and we've been doing that since 2010 with a very high success rate. Like the majority of our clients, regardless of what course they're going into, and we have clients all over the world, most of them make it. And now that's what I do full time. We train people for soft selection courses.
Outstanding. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation because today we are going to continue talking about playing the game. So Shaun had this great idea in the green room before we were talking about how we were going to engage this. I'm going to turn it over to you, Shaun. What are we doing?
All right, thanks. So first things first, before I even launch into anything, I got to hit Craig up with a question. It just popped into my head. And so yesterday, Craig had asked me, because I was on the Building the Elite podcast, which is going to launch hopefully in 2037 or something like that, so that I don't have to listen to it. So it'll launch soon. But Craig had asked me yesterday to send a bio on my life for the verbiage for the podcast. And I thought, and I think I typed something along the lines of, geez, I've never had to write a proper bio before, but I'll give it a crack. And so as I was typing things out, it's embarrassing to type. I feel embarrassed to type out my bio because it feels like, I don't know, I don't like talking about myself that way. So as I was typing it out, something that Craig just said, where he claimed or made claim to the fact that they have an excellent success rate. And in my verbiage that I sent to Craig yesterday, I'd stated that within my classroom when I was a computer system engineer, I had good successes with my students, so much so that a publishing house contacted me to write a book to explain why I was having so much success with my students, which I wasn't really keen to do. But as I was typing that bio out, I was really uncomfortable, man. Like I felt like I didn't want to claim what I've accomplished in the past, which is maybe imposter syndrome, or I'm not sure what it is, but I struggled to do it. So, and that's at nearly 60 years of age, I find it hard to type out what I've accomplished in my life. So now I have a specific question for you, Craig. How long did it take you to be able to rattle off your verbiage that you just rattled off and get comfortable with it? You know what I mean?
I just made that one up on the spot, but
What?
yeah, it's taken a long time. And I've done podcasts before with like other people in the soft community who were like, wait, let's try that again, and had me like, because I had the same thing, like I couldn't really describe it well, and it was awkward, and I don't like talking about myself. But I think for one, you Canadians are especially strong on that humility and quiet thing, and like not describing your background very much. And there's like the other side of the spectrum, which is like the SEAL team guys in the US, or like everything like you hear about at the moment you start talking to one of them. But it's something weird you have to get comfortable with if you have a public life as a former special operator, because you spent most of your professional life just deliberately not talking about any of this, or deliberately sidestepping any of those conversations, and not letting anyone know who you were. And then you, in order to like have a reason to be in these conversations or talking to someone from this perspective, you have to explain your background and who you are. So I usually just mix it with a lot of self-deprecation. Like literally, most of my job was harassing fishermen and misappropriating tax dollars. So I don't overly glorify it, you know.
Yeah, I've tried that tact myself, and it amuses me. I mean, like I have to have fun with it, which I guess is the game within the game of trying to put across the point while still trying to have a little bit of fun at my own expense to move through the moment, I suppose. So, yeah, self-deprecating is a thing for sure. Thanks. It was just a random question, but I was curious if you had any pro tips on how to work through it. And I guess what I heard, to paraphrase, is it's just going to take a really long time and it's going to be super uncomfortable. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like that involves a lot of editing on my part because I've had like 9 different jobs as well. Like I had a biotech startup for a while. I wrote a bunch of patents on biometric monitoring tech. I found all kinds of weird
Ooh,
things.
nice,
And
buddy.
I just delete that when I know that like most of this audience is interested in like military tactical kind of stuff or like human performance kind of stuff. Because it kind of gets the general idea across without having to read a whole resume, you know, which is the hard part as well.
Maybe this should all be about Craig today in this
Maybe
episode and dragging out his deepest,
every little
darkest
thing.
career secrets.
Well, I have a question for the two of you actually, because you guys brought up an interesting point in that the quiet professional, the special forces model of being the quiet professional, where Craig, you said you have to kind of duck and dodge those conversations, and you have to, if somebody asks, Shaun, you told me earlier about, if people knew about your top secret life back in the day, you would have been crucified very quickly by the
Hmm.
military, right? So I'm wondering how much of playing that game of being the quiet professional, like, oh yeah, I work in the military, not a big deal, to actually having to play that out into the real world as playing a different game completely. What's that like? Do you think that has something to do with it, of just having to be really good at that game, keeping it quiet, and now it's such a difficult thing to come forward with?
I think maybe, I don't know if Craig asked me that specifically in the podcast or
We
words to the
covered
effect of.
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that certainly from my generation of Tier 1 Special Operations, when I left at JTF2, I mean, it's not like I left with a cover story. We weren't we weren't that squared away back then. I mean,
Mm.
we didn't have like a playbook that you just flipped open a binder and read that single page that gave you all the answers as to how you were supposed to um, your, comport yourself in the future as a veteran or as a just left Tier 1 and now you're a civilian. Like, I didn't read that playbook. So when I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I'm going to say it casually. I just made things up. I just made it up as I went along. Like, the stuff that I didn't talk about were my own decisions, that I wouldn't talk about those things. Or if someone asked me specifics because they had heard maybe that I used to be in that game, well, I'd try to figure out a way to tell not the story. And so I was kind of making it up as I went along, not like having fun with it or being a cartoon character and lying or anything weird like that. What I had to do was move through the world after I left the teams without a playbook and not talk about the playbook and not talk about the teams and literally be writing the playbook in real time as I was making things up, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Hmm.
Craig, what do you think?
I I mean, one thing that I learned even when I was still in the military was that people generally aren't thinking about you to the extent that you might think. Like there's a thing called transparency bias where we always kind of impose our internal life on someone else and assume they kind of know more about what's in our head and our life and are actually interested in that. But most people aren't. So most of the time when you're in that position, talking to someone in the civilian world, first, they don't necessarily care. They're just waiting for their turn to talk about themselves. And then even if you were to describe what you do, they're not going to understand it. So you can go with very vague or non-descriptive titles, or you can kind of brush it off like, yeah, I was in the Navy. I did, I didn't just kind of like let it float past. And most of the time, you don't have to go into any sort of detail. And then if you do, you do that like escalating one bit at a time, giving them just enough detail to satisfy their curiosity and then move on. But it's either people aren't going to know what you're talking about anyway, or they do, which means that a handful of keywords are sufficient to communicate what you need to say. Like if Shaun is talking to someone else from the special ops community and he says, I was a JTF2, that's the end of the conversation. They know what they need to know. Like you don't have to talk about it a whole lot more. So in either case, you're able to communicate either kind of an absence of information and just roll the conversation onto them, which you've probably practiced quite a bit, or you kind of do like this verbal handshake, like secret handshake thing, where you just kind of give just enough information that you do the nod and then you move on. But most of the time, people aren't that interested in it if you're not trying to make it interesting, which is an ego gratification thing or something like that. For me professionally, I draw a line where I never talk about anything operational. I like in our book and anything like that, I talk about our like the training that I went through and like interpersonal things, but I never talk about anything that we did operationally. And I just draw all of our lessons from training experiences. So I can subtract that entire operational life, and it's enough just from the training stuff to communicate what we need to do. And then I can leave all that other stuff in the dark and leave it there.
I like that. That's how I have tried to run it myself as well. That's how I've tried to explain my life as well. And so the interesting thing for me now, Craig, is that worked really well like 10 years ago. It worked even better 20 years ago. It's harder nowadays because of the proliferation of information out on the interwebs, because of Call of Duty, because of all of the things that are starting to gather steam in the sense of it's now more and more apparent what goes on in special operations units, even to the layman. I mean, you watch any casual movie nowadays and there's definitely someone Aussie rappelling down a skyscraper to do an explosive entry and through a window. I mean, it's definitely going to happen. Every second movie's got that scene nowadays. Yeah. So the general information is out there to the general population. And so if someone walks up and asks me a specific question, then I'm going to try to duck, dodge, dive that all day long. But if someone walks up and they're familiar with the general sense of special operations, and they ask me a general question, that I can give a general answer with just a little bit of an edge to it, and that edge might reference how intense something was, or how adverse something was, or how chaotic something was. If I add just a little bit of training edge to that, then it's sometimes enough to push them into their own arena or into their own trajectory of trying to become a better person. So I find that today is a different day than 10 or 20 years ago. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, people are better at knowing the acronyms now for the most part, because there's there are so many vets now that have gotten out of the military, like the post 9/11 era. Everyone was busy. There were a lot of people doing stuff. Now a lot of those people have gotten out and they're just bored and hanging out on the internet and talking about what they did. So there's a lot more information out there, and people are a little better at navigating it. But if the dividing line is like, how much do I have to personally reveal? I'll use a similar tactic where I'll give them enough to answer the question they have or indulge their curiosity. And then I just use, I think these are also just coping mechanisms from being extremely introverted. I just roll the conversation back onto them and get them to talk about themselves and make it about them. And usually they'll have a conversation and realize they don't actually know anything about me, but they felt really well listened to, and I just leave it at that. And I don't know if that's like a combination of like actual OPSEC and then just my natural tendencies as an introvert to not want to talk about myself.
That's good, man. I like that.
Secret squirrel techniques. I like it. So I had a question on this too, is that, we see this a lot, as you guys were saying. We see, a lot of vets are out there. A lot of people are basically screaming from the rooftops, "Hey, look at me! Hey, look at me!" To a lot of their benefits, right? You're seeing a lot of successful veteran entrepreneurs, people like that, who are obviously doing the work, but they're also utilizing the fact that they have a certain gravitas from whatever unit they were part of.
Hmm.
What do you guys think of that? Like, because, like, yeah, it does help them work. They're still doing the work. Let me put it that way. They're still doing all the work that's required to become successful, but they are still utilizing that little tip of the hat, if you know what I mean, right? Shaun, what do
Hmm.
you think?
I think it's a slippery slope that's fraught with danger unless you're paying attention. And I mean, as an individual, if I'm out there trying to engage in some form of solicitation, I'm trying to create some sort of business opportunities by putting myself out there in a legit way versus a legit plus 10% kind of embellishing way. Those are two radically different things. And so I'll give a good example of my position on this. So my Instagram feed, sometimes ads will pop up and it will be for something insane like I just developed a 3-week program that's going to turn you into James Bond or whatever. And it's all of the images, all of the sexy images that a person would ever want to see to want to become tier 1, etc. And as you watch these little slideshows or a little video clip or something that is developed to become so appealing to the general masses that they definitely want it, I've then sent a comment or a DM to the owner of the site who's putting out this kind of information with a simple question. Just curious, did you ever serve in the military? And sometimes the answer is, my friend did, or etc. So you can use your imagination hat as to some of these things that I've kind of tried to understand on what's going out there in the way of offerings. And I want to say like 8 times out of 10, it's people that have got zero qualifications to be able to offer what they're offering. It's a massive smoke and mirrors marketing pitch. Now, contrast that directly against Building the Elite podcast or Building the Elite Instagram page, where the material is legit. It's put out nearly every day and it is free. And I feel that the body of work that Building the Elite has done is almost like an encyclopedia of how to become awesome. And it's based on sound practices, time-tested, experience-based, within the special operations community, to some degree supported. And so there's a massive difference between what Craig and the gang is doing on one end of the spectrum versus the other end of the spectrum, where it's shallow experience and obvious an obvious attempt to try to scam people to some degree. And so the game out there on the internet, everyone's playing a game in this particular area where they're trying to gain clients or gain money or gain fame or gain spotlight. And it can be played really well. And by play, I mean done well. Or it can be played really poorly, done poorly. And I'd be curious as to what you guys think about that on the ads that you guys have seen out there.
Craig, what do you think?
I don't know how many of these ads I get. Our Instagram, I don't have a personal one. I just look at our business one, and it's really random. Half of my ads are for cooking and stuff. So I don't get. Are these like people doing shooting courses? Or these like
All of it,
business guru
all of it.
guys? Or
It's
okay.
it's mostly, I'll say mostly, how to prepare for special operations. So
Oh
training
yeah.
plans and maybe it's because I follow you guys. Are you guys the ones who are responsible for all the goofy ads that I get? I'm going to
It's
stop following you if it
possible.
gets rid of the ads.
Yeah.
But there are ads that are, fitness based, preparation based, or more correctly, and it's probably because I spend a lot of time researching or digging my head into mindset. A lot of these things are mindset coaching to become special operations.
Hmm.
It's and they're, I mean, they're dead ends. I mean, there's nothing there that is of a value other than someone put effort into creating a smoke and mirrors show. So I don't know if you've
Pretty
seen any of
pictures.
these, but do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen a lot of those that are in that space. First, I do want to caveat, like, I'm not the arbiter of anyone else's life, and people are free to do whatever they want. Like my opinion on someone else's life or business or whatever does not matter. But yeah, I've seen that's kind of that field. A lot of the how to prepare for special operations guys are people where their qualification for that was an N1 sample of they went through special operations selection at some point, which is a lot like having an athlete who thinks that their ability to run fast qualifies them to teach other people how to run fast. When if you ask them their method for doing that at scale with a diverse population who have different backgrounds and different needs than they did, is just telling them to run faster. Like they don't actually have a method or a system that can apply to anyone outside of themselves, and they're not even sure, they couldn't explain why what they did worked for them either. They're just saying, like, I did it, do a thing that I sell and maybe you'll be like me, which is not true. And that's one of the tests that I look for when I'm evaluating, like, whether someone is worth paying attention to, is how well are they able to apply the things that they talk about to people who are not them. Because if they're not doing that at scale successfully with a diverse population who is distinctly different from them, then most likely they're just telling them, and they're not even aware of this most of the time, they're just telling themselves a story, a narrative fallacy about what it is that made them who they were or who they are. Like, this is the magic workout that got me here, whatever. And that's probably excluding 20 years of something that happened athletically, developmentally, genetically, whatever, to get them to that point. And they're just saying it was this thing that I can just so happen to sell you for $19 is the thing that did that. And I don't think in a lot of cases that's malicious. It's just that people don't know any better. It's like the dad at the high school football game yelling at the kids to football better because he was a football player in high school. He doesn't know how to coach it, teach it, apply it to anyone else but himself, but he remembers that he played football, he footballed good. So he's going to yell at people to do that. It's the equivalent of that guy selling a $30 PDF on the internet to people. And that's a lot of, I think, what we see. But if I think of the people who use their special operations background outside of the special operations world, there are a few, a handful who've kind of stayed in that niche. Like, you could think of the Black Rifle coffee guys that are presumably quite successful, where their whole thing is just they put a picture of an assault rifle and a bag of mediocre coffee, and a lot of people buy that because of the brand image.
The
Like,
symbology.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, it's that's it. That's the product. Is like, it's an image.
Mhm.
Um, there are other people who maybe have started legit training courses, doing shooting skills or something like that. But most of the friends that I knew just transferred their fundamental personality traits, like their work ethic, their conscientiousness, their emotional stability, their ability to rapidly learn in a stressful setting, and they did that in a new domain. So now they're lawyers, they're diplomats, they're entrepreneurs, there's finance guys, they're people who are just fundamentally who they were and fundamentally what got them through special operations selection to begin with is now being transferred into a new domain. And they're doing that successfully. And I think that's probably the most admirable or genuine use of that background. And then there's like the poison version of that, which is the guy who was in some kind of special ops unit who now has a beard and a business suit and is therefore a business guru. Like, for
Oh
no
yeah.
real reason other than that, they have a
Well,
business
the
suit and a
beard.
beard.
I mean, the
Yeah,
beard.
Yeah, and that's her whole thing, and is like
It's like a PhD, man.
Yeah, yeah. There's those guys, but I think most of the people who ethically and successfully transferred their special operations background to something else just really what they did was transfer their fundamental personality that was honed and developed in the special operations world. But if you think about it outside of things like those kind of meta skills like self-discipline, work ethic, emotional stability, nothing we did in the military transfers that well specifically into the civilian world unless you're a butler or an assassin. And there's not a huge market for that. So like
No, I tried. I tried both.
yeah, yeah.
I even combined the two, but even
gonna
that
say.
didn't help.
I was gonna say Shaun is a butler assassin right there. Like,
Yeah.
that's a key. Now I had a question on this because we were talking about this earlier in the green room a little bit of the people that enter into special operations with the concept of I want to do the work versus the people that enter into the conversation or into that world that they want the patch, they want the look or the feel of it, right? And I'm wondering how many people that want the patch get through selection, do the job, realize what, this isn't for me, and then get out and become those people, if you know what I mean. I wonder if
Oh yeah.
that's kind of like a streamline versus the people who want to do the work, show up, do the work, and then okay, cool, now I'm going to go work somewhere else. If you get my drift, what do you think, Craig?
Yeah, I think in like I guess through that progression, you're looking at someone who has a need for external signaling devices. Like they need some other object to tell them and to tell the world who they are, because without that object, they're not sure of the answer to that question. And that tends to negatively correlate with success in selection in general. Like you've probably, like Shaun, I'm sure you saw a lot of those guys who, if you ask them why they wanted to join this unit and go through this miserable process, they just said it sounds cool, And to some extent, like these are 18, 19-year-old kids in a lot of cases, like that is a part of the motivation, but with the most successful, reliable ones, it's not the only motivation. They'll have some kind of deeper reason that they can articulate that is more closely related to a reflection of their value system in this process, and the more mature ones will recognize it as a process of like becoming something through experience, where the ones who need an external signal, who are probably also often the ones who have a lot of stupid tattoos, that's another like external signal that you'll see a lot and that seems to negatively correlate with success. The ones who need another display device to tell a story to the world for them, those are the ones who are also quite shaky. But yeah, I think those who are fixated on those superficial signals are probably also more likely to use them when they get out as the definition of their identity, as like like basically this is my personality, this patch that I have right here, this tab, this special colored hat, whatever, this is who I am, this is my personality, and that's what they've got. If they made it through, which I think it becomes unlikelier that they do. But yeah, those are also probably the guys who are going to be the most vocal and have like 19 bumper stickers and all the shirts and all that stuff, and they just have to tell the world about it. And I think that comes down to a sense of like fundamental insecurity or a lack of like basically a relationship with the self. Like they're not entirely clear on who they are without that external signal device. So it becomes very important to them.
Yeah. Get out of my mind, man. This was
hang
me
on a
like
second.
10 years ago.
We're like, I think Craig has been going now for about 15 minutes, and all I want to hear is another 15 minutes of Craig dropping the freaking heat.
Right?
Because, I mean, he started off with a straight up, super legit statement with, well, I'm not the arbiter of ... And so coming in all non-judgmental, coming in like really even keeled, and then like not being judgy, but like calling out like obviousness, things that we all see from time to time, and clearly representing, in my perspective, what is going on out there, and saying it in a way that was balanced and diplomatic and non-confrontational, but stating what I see so clearly happening out there. And so now with that in place, like anything that Craig just said is not offensive and should act actually as an opportunity for anyone who just listened to that to think, am I that guy? Am I doing that? Because if I am, I need to get a grip on that. So I think that these kind of conversations, as long as, and our guests typically, when they tune into this kind of stuff, are pretty open-minded. And so what you just dropped was super important. I don't want to overlook that. And you just did it in such a great way that I feel like that should be a 15-minute clip, not a 90-second clip. You know what I mean?
You guys should see my book. It's just like 21:54, 23:45, 26:40, like, just constantly like, oh man, this clip just keeps going. It's fantastic. And you know, the funny thing is, or not the funny thing, but the more accurate thing is, this was me, right? You described me for the first 10 years of me getting out. I had no concept of who I was without the job.
Without the
got all
bumper
Stupid
sticker.
tattoos.
I got the bumper stickers, I got the tattoos, I got the shirts, I got all the things because that's what I really like. That's all I knew. And so I just wanted to hold on to it for a very long time. And it wasn't until pretty much the collective, I'd say probably
Yeah.
maybe a year ago about this time is when we started, well, Shaun started poking into my own brain, doing the exact same thing. So
Doing Craig stuff.
doing exactly that. Now, I have a couple comments I want to hit on just real fast before we jump forward here. Tanya jumps in. She says, I didn't write the book on how to make it through selection, but we did write a book on making it through selection. Yes, absolutely. I think they might be talking about you, Craig. Carl jumps in here with an interesting question, too. He says, do you think wanting to embrace and conquer fears is part of the want to join Tier 1? What do you think? Craig, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that part of what people are doing there is just answering a really hard question, which is like, who am I as a person, and can I handle this incredibly difficult thing? Like it's kind of hard to articulate that, but when someone goes to one of these selection courses, they're learning something about themselves that no one else will know about themselves without having gone. Like there are very few things that someone can go through in life that will fundamentally strip a person down to who they are at their core and make them face that. And whether you're successful in selection or not, you've answered that question. Like you've been in that fight. And everyone else walking around will, to some level, wonder that about themselves. Like, would I be able, what would the answer to that question be? Like, who am I really when everything is taken away? And they'll never know, honestly, like unless some other life circumstance throws them into a very difficult position. There's a lot of people who will never know that answer to who they are and what they're capable of, and whether they could conquer those fears. Yeah, that's what I have.
Dropping fire left, right, and center. Shaun, what do you think?
I agree with that. And I've said it previously that Tier 1 selection or becoming a member of Tier 1 is, to me, I saw it as a puzzle that I didn't know how to solve, and that it was going to be a huge challenge that I wasn't sure I would be successful in. I knew that it was going to be extremely adverse, which I have always appreciated. So stepping into that and adding all of those ingredients together, it was essentially this, and it's exactly what Craig said. I wanted to learn me. I wanted to see what I could do. I wasn't sure if I would be capable of, but I wanted to know if I was capable of. And so to me, it was like, I don't know how, as Craig said, I don't know how to articulate how much of a privilege it was to go through that process in order to better understand me. And so I wish that every human being could do selection. And they might last an hour, they might last a day, maybe even 2 days, who knows. But however long they are in that selection process, every minute that they're in it, they're learning who they are a little bit better. Now, if you can stay in for the full range of selection and then move your way right into Tier 1 after an extensive process, by the time you get badged, you're a completely different person. And by that I mean you now know who you are, not who you thought you were. And those are two different people.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking that you're something is different than knowing what you are. And the only way to understand that is to do things, as Craig said, that are similar to Tier 1 selection, that are so testing across so many variables. They're so diverse and deep, these tests, that eventually you expose yourself to yourself, and then you get to decide what you're going to do with it, whether you're going to proceed forward or whether you're going to crack or quit or fail, or you've seen enough and you don't want to see any more. These are like rites of passage to the order of magnitude that a lot of people can't understand. And so through that rite of passage, at the end of it, you come away with clarity on who you are as a person. I wish everyone could experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Craig, you got any further thoughts on that?
I think what Shaun just described also matters relationally, in that the people that you go through selection with, or even knowing that someone is from another, like a similar background, and they're part of the SOF community, that environment gives you the opportunity to see what your friends are like on the worst days of their lives. Like during some of their absolute worst moments, you're able to see who they are and what kind of character they have. And so you know who they are all the way down, all the way through the layers. And that's one of the reasons that people have such tight bonds within SOF units, and why there's this kind of shared respect or understanding between people who have those backgrounds, because you have some idea of who they are. And I think it's another thing in the civilian world where it's easy to be kind when kindness is easy. It's easy to be generous when generosity is easy. You know, it's easy to do all of these things when it's not hard. But to display strength or kindness or consideration or bravery or whatever, when it's the absolute hardest thing to do, is where you start to separate people and see who they really are. Because if you're in just the civilian world, and there are situations in the civilian world where you can learn this about people, but for the most part, you don't fundamentally know who someone is when things are going to be really hard, when their true character is revealed. And I think that's one of the benefits that you see in these communities, and it's one of the reasons that people are so tight knit, and why they have a hard time like meshing with people outside of it, because they don't know who people are without having seen them in those tests and in those moments.
Shaun?
You know, Craig had said something a little earlier about how the bumper stickers and the T-shirts and the hats and the beards and all of that stuff, the usual accoutrement. And here I am wearing a freaking airborne hoodie, and but I don't have any bumper stickers, so I guess that's a bonus. And my beard is a bit weak, so
And no tattoos.
no tattoos. So the interesting thing about this airborne hoodie, and when I left the teams, like I didn't look in the rearview mirror, and I didn't wear a T-shirt that said who I was. And I only just started wearing these kind of things a couple of years ago. To my now I've got a bumper sticker on my chest, but I never wore these kind of things for a lot of years. And it's because when I left the teams, I wanted to play the game in a new way for me, like not with any veteran advantage, or not with any T-shirt advantage or beard advantage. I just went out and tried to smash in my way to see success at the time in the various careers that I had. And all along the way, I didn't rely on what rank was on my sleeve, or what qualifications I had, or that one time I Aussie rappelled down a thing. None of those were parts of my conversations out there in the big world. My conversations were based on the career that I was in, that wasn't reliant on having a conversation about the things I used to do in the past. Though those things in the past allowed me to do the things at that time in the present to be successful in the industry that I was in, I just didn't talk about it. I didn't have to talk about how my discipline and focus allowed me to become, a certain thing in a certain industry. I just did, but didn't talk about all of the common attributes or characteristics that are necessary to have success in tier one. But now I find myself like wearing bumper stickers on my chest and starting to talk about a little bit, to some degree, some of these common characteristics or traits, or some of the ways that you can live your life in the sense of human betterment in order to have better success, moving towards a better life, whether you were ever in tier one or not. I think that no one has to be special operations. In fact, nobody even has to be in the military in order to start living like a special operator as an overarching goal, or thematically applying some of the things that we talk about over here or that we talk about in this podcast today, these things that are available to everyone, but not until you wrap your mind around the fact that you're going to engage in that process, that you want to be able to live a life that is predicated on some of the great lessons over on Building the Elite podcast verbiage on Instagram. If everyone would read that every morning and then apply some of that verbiage that day to their day, you don't ever have to be able to spell special operations, but you can live in a way that leads you towards a special operations oriented way of living, I feel.
Yeah. Craig, you got any other thoughts on that? Or I got a couple comments here, but
Yeah, I was thinking about what Shaun is describing. Like, I think his use of like the external signals is probably the result of his moving into a mentor role, where it's basically a form of advertising to help expand his reach or his scope in doing that, so that he can work with and help more people. And that's primarily what it is. Aside from that, like if you think of how Shaun described himself when he got out of the military, how he didn't have any of that stuff. There's this saying that a rich man doesn't have to tell you that he's rich. And generally, the more secure someone is with themselves, the less likely they are to feel the need to explain themselves to random strangers, to anyone at all. Like, they're just okay with who they are, and they don't feel that impulse to explain. And it made me think of this. My wife and I this summer went to the East Coast to spend like 3 weeks on the beach where her family is from. And she has some family there who were like, "Oh, you guys don't need to rent a car while you're there. We have a spare car. Just borrow that for the 3 weeks. It'll save you a ton of money." And it was like, great. And we went and got the car. And it was like the crappiest car I have seen in a long time. Like, like the paint has demolished, or the sun has demolished the paint off of it. It smells odd. It makes weird sounds, like it's dying, like it's struggling just to function at stoplights.
It's a wounded animal.
Yeah, it was bad. It was like weird stains everywhere, and so I've had this thing for a long time of always being conscious of that urge to like explain yourself, like to people, and that driving that car was I got judged by so many like teenage girls on bicycles. and I talked to my wife about this, and she did the same thing. Like, she was getting gas, and we're in New Jersey, where they pump your gas for you. It's like a law that someone pumps your gas for you. And there's this girl pumping her gas for her, and she just spontaneously said, "It's not my car. It's not my car." Like, because you feel this urge to explain this thing that you're kind of insecure about, because you feel like it might represent a reflection of who you are as a person. And it's a bad representation of that, if that's who you are as a person, and I think the same thing can happen with people who are insecure in their careers and who they are as a person and their skill at jujitsu and anything. Like, the stronger your urge to just explain yourself, to random strangers because they're judging you or you feel like they're judging you, probably the deeper your sense of like a lack of self or a lack of confidence in who you are as a person. So like that driving around in that terrible car was like an interesting exercise in practicing that, like being mindful of that need to explain myself and absolve myself of these insecurities or feeling bad about this thing. And it's worth being mindful of. Like most people aren't driving around in like a dramatically worse car than they normally drive. But if you feel like you have to tell people something about yourself to feel accepted by them, even total strangers, then it's worth kind of like looking into who you are and the relationship you have with yourself, you know, like your own confidence of who you are as a person.
I love that.
You're hitting on all the marks, and I'd like you to get out of my brain, please, because that would be fantastic. Satch put in this comment here. He's like, Craig just peeked into Chance's brain. Not just a peek, like he cracked this thing open, and we're looking at it wide open right now.
Craig, the X-ray machine.
Right? Just looking at my own head. And I wanted to bring this up because I think it's a great point, is the fact that I used to do that all the time. All the time. Anybody would ask me about anything, and I would somehow bring it into the military. I would this happened when this happened because of this, because of da 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 da. And I would always bring it back to that. And in the last, say maybe 6 or 7 months, I've rarely even mentioned the military anymore. If somebody asks me about a particular thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, it happened years ago, not a big deal. And they're like, what happened? And I'm like, oh well, I was in the Army. I tripped. It's not a big deal. And so it's now become like a distant past rather than a yesterday it happened. Right? And I think that has a lot to do with it, and just understanding and accepting of where I am, who I am, and all these things, which has allowed me to just close the door on it.
When did you realize that?
Just these last, say about a week ago, where I realized it's actually been happening.
And how did you feel about that realization?
It was relieving. Nice. Like it was just like a weight, like, oh, I can let this go finally. Nice. So yeah, I think that you're dead on the money, Craig, in terms of like what I was going through and what I was trying to portray. Was there was always this explanation of, well, it happened because of this, or I can't do crowds because I don't like people, because all the way back to when I was in the military, or like suicide bombers in Afghanistan, right? Like that's not why I don't like people anymore. that's not the reason behind it, right? Yeah. So that is it's a great explanation. I really wanted to just hammer that point home. So it was fantastic.
And that doesn't detract from anything you've accomplished or like who you are as a person. It just means that you're fundamentally more confident with who you are and where you are right now, and that you're looking forward rather than anchoring on something in the past and using that to tell the world who you are.
100%.
Yeah, and not only does it not detract, like how you just put that across, pal, is like it's a win. It's a freaking Olympic podium win. Being able to understand that and then publicly mention it, and then hopefully someone who's listening to this right now or later today will hear that and think, yeah, man, that's kind of how I feel. I can do that as well, and encourage them to kind of drop the two anvils off their left and right shoulder and just lighten up and get on with being freaking awesome,
Yeah. I thought of an example of someone who lives, I think, near you guys. She's in Calgary. Chandra Crawford. She used to run an organization called Girls Gone Fast and Female.
Okay, choose wisely now.
Fast and Female, which is for like female athletes, like a mentorship thing. She's a Canadian Olympic gold medalist in skiing, cross-country skiing. And me and my wife were hanging out with her and her husband in Canmore. They have a condo in Canmore. And Steph was like, I want to see your gold medal. That's so cool. Like you would never know if you were hanging out with Shannon. Like she would never mention it. And not because she's like trying to suppress it. She just doesn't care. Like it doesn't occur to her as being something like an important part of herself. And my wife was like, I want to see it though. Like, what do they look like? Are they heavy? And she's like, I have to find it. I don't know where it is. And she had to go rustle around in a room, and she found it behind a dresser with like a bottle of perfume that she'd been looking for 2 months. Like it was a project to even figure out where this thing was. And then she brought it out, and like it was the most like non-big deal thing for her, because it's not like the thing that defines who she is as a person. It's just a thing that she did one time, and it's that thing that she did is the product of who she is as a person, but it's not the sole definition of that. And I think that's what I think all of us are kind of working towards, like to do great things, but also to not pin our sense of identity on the accomplishment of those things. Because, like if she had tripped and gotten a silver medal, she'd still be the same person,
I just thought of a really great analogy, and I think I'm going to turn it into some sort of merch somewhere. But
no.
you can climb the mountain, but you can't take it with you.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Like that's
all right. That's doable. It's not a T-shirt though.
Well, we'll see when I get the imagery out of my head.
Don't do
that's
it.
Going to happen. Don, I got any other thoughts on that before I?
Well,
jump into some of these
just a quick one. I love the spirit of that conversation, and I love that's the way it was presented. The medal, not a big deal, and etc. However, I'd just like to state that that's a way, but another way is to do all of that and then realize, hey, people will find some inspiration in this moment if I just flash my medal every once in a while rather than lose it behind the chest of drawers. And so, I feel the same way, man. And same with my sons, like the medals that they've won in BJJ or Nordic or whatever. Like most of those are in the garbage just because I know it sounds terrible, but they just have no real sense of they're so important to them that medal is worth more than anything else. I mean, they're in the garbage. Along with a lot of my things that I've accomplished in the past I don't know, they're on a garbage landfill right now, just because I am not focused on those kind of things. However, the other side of the coin is, for some people, they'll gain inspiration in seeing those medals, or if I got to hold that Olympic gold medal in my hand, it would impact me and would maybe fire me up somehow, maybe. So I think that these kind of ideals where an individual doesn't need that kind of external validation or isn't into that kind of flashing the things that they've accomplished in the past, like I'm not, well, I still have kind of almost a duty or a responsibility to, from time to time, flash a medal or whatever as the proxy to inspire people that they too, if I can do it, they can. And so I think there is a case to be made for it for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, it's what we talked about at the beginning of this, or in the middle, where like now you're using like your shirt to signal to people, like to start a conversation, to help people understand who you are and what you have to offer. And it would also be something you use like on a website when you do an introduction to a podcast. Like you're going to use these things as needed to like inspire people or establish your qualifications for having an opinion on this subject. And Chandra uses her medal and her athletic background in the same way, with Fast and Female or the mentorship work that she does, like the teenage girls that she's working with, trying to steer them towards sports. They know she's an Olympian, but it also isn't the only thing that she is. And that's not, like the basis of her personality, which is the same for you and kind of the fundamental concept we're talking about.
I love that. How, by the way, how did you get involved in Canmore's gorgeous. How did you end up in that sort of neck of the woods or getting involved in that relationship?
I met her when I was working with Precision Nutrition, like a long time ago,
Nice.
10 years ago probably, and we just stayed in touch. And then we put together a trip and we just went up there to visit them with some other friends in Canmore, like partially because Canmore is beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Due to the tourist thing, but it was also just a social thing to go and hang out with them.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Next time you're in Canada, you have to give me a shout because
I'm really annoyed that we didn't hook up.
Jeez. Well, we're just about at time here. I'm going to hit a couple of these comments and then we'll do some final thoughts and then we'll shut it down for the afternoon. But do really appreciate the conversation. Craig, this has been awesome. Really, really awesome. I've just loved every minute of it. So
it's been a little too good, though.
It's
been a little too awesome. I'm a bit irritated with Craig cracking it out of the park this much, especially for an introvert as well. Like, what the heck?
It's
slow it down, pal.
You're showing up, Shaun. So now he's feeling uncomfortable. So
I'm
now he's,
competitive now. Now I'm in
yeah,
competitive mode.
it's on. Here we go. Well, Salty Jinx jumps in with this. He says, "I think the unfortunate part is some people won't mature soon enough to make that leap and attempt a selection. They never understood the why for themselves until they burned off some of their youth and found some of the answers you needed to seek that level of challenge every day." What do you guys think? Thought, Craig? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, yes, that's probably true. And if someone's missed their window, and also like that's not the only sort of rite of passage kind of thing someone can do. It's not the only hard thing someone can do to find out who they are. Like there are lots of other avenues for that. But yeah, hopefully if that is sort of the direction they were going, but they were overly rudderless to make the commitment to do it then, and they missed their window. You know, if you're 40, you're not going into a selection course anytime ever again. But you can find hard things and you can test yourself in other ways. So it's never too late to still answer that question. You just have to find a different form of a test to do it.
Shaun, what do you think?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. If JTF2 hadn't have been a thing or hadn't have been invented, for lack of a better term, when I was in the military, then I would have missed that window of opportunity of being in special operations because it didn't exist. But when it was created, I took that window of opportunity and rolled my dice and went all in and was successful. And so I will call it, I got lucky. I got my window of opportunity. But then when I left the military, I wasn't satisfied with that. I was looking for other windows of opportunity, which, I mean, right about the time that I was writing that 700-page book, after teaching my day and night class, thinking, this is insane. That was a rite of passage. That was a window of opportunity to become an author, for lack of a better term, which is something that I'd never considered, nor had I ever considered being in JTF2 before it got created. Lots of things in life will show up in front of you, and I could rattle off a bunch more things that I've engaged in as window of opportunities that are freaking hard. So hard that by the time I come through the other end of the process, I can look back at it and think, oh, that was fairly legit. That's how I think of windows of opportunities. When something shows up that I want to crack out of the park, however long it takes me, that's time to engage. That is time to get to work and turn it into something that later in life you can look back on and give yourself a little bit of a nod for the effort that it took to accomplish whatever it was, that you can have a certain sense of small satisfaction. Call it was acceptable work, for lack of a better term, that many years later you're feeling pretty good about. So the game is all around us. It's in the past, it's in the present, and it's in the future. And it's our responsibility to identify these windows of opportunity. All of the JTF2 windows of opportunity that will be in front of all of us for the rest of our lives until we die are there every single month, every single week, and definitely every year. So just get to work, figure out what it is that you want to nail, and then start nailing it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Now, you got some more thoughts on that, Craig?
Now the one example that came up for me was I have a 1.5-year-old daughter, my wife, and as an example of like a really hard thing that is not in the military, raising kids. And like I realized this like in the first couple of months with our daughter, like I don't know how a single parent can exist and nobody dies. Like it is so hard to do.
It's so hard.
So outside of soft selection and stuff, like if that's not for you or you've missed the window or whatever, like that's as one example of an incredibly hard thing that is tough to do well, that is available to most anyone. Like that is one of an everyday challenges that where people, I don't know, have that opportunity to like kind of find out who they are and develop who they are and have an impact on the world.
I would agree in concept, but I would tell anybody don't just have kids
Don't do
for
it
the
as
challenge, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this seems like it's gonna be
This is
hard.
my
All
new
right,
David
let's do
Goggins challenge.
it. Right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, so just to play with that, and I know we're close to the end, so I'll make this very brief. You know, I was changing diapers while training for 24-hour solo mountain bike races while coaching athletes around the world. So you can be busy at work, you can be busy at home, and you can be busy in your window of opportunity called cracking it out of the park. And so parenting is hard. But when the family's in bed, it's my time to start cracking out whatever it is that I want to crack out, that next window of opportunity to become a world champion, as it were. So I think that there's lots of hard things in life. Parenting is super freaking hard. But I don't think anyone should limit themselves to, oh, I'm doing the hard thing right now. I can't add hard to hard. Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
That is an excellent point. Absolutely. Now, last couple comments, and then we'll do some final thoughts. Satch jumps in here. He says, I think anyone can experience a form of selection. They just have to hold themselves accountable through their own tests. Which I think is could be accurate as well. Salty Jinx jumps in here. It says, Satch, seek challenge and rise to it. I like that a lot. And you got one more here. So agreed at Salty, not only test once, but always with progressive difficulty, making it harder. I like it. Any final thoughts on anything we've gone over so far today, playing the game, anything at all? Craig, what do you think?
Nope. I don't have anything else.
Dropping wisdom bombs through the whole conversation.
Just making my freaking life hard is what he's doing.
I like it. John, what do you think? Final thoughts?
I'd like to go with Craig's nope, but I've got to win, so I'm going to add something to the final comments there right at the end, and to Satch and Salty Jinx. I know when Satch said in quotation marks, selection is available to anyone. We can all engage in selection. Yada yada yada. In the spirit of things, I agree. However, I don't want anyone out there to be confused. There's selection that you create yourself each day that you think is selection, but it ain't. There's only one selection, and it's such a freak show that no comparison can be made to actual selection and the selections that we create on the daily within our lives that we think are hard. You can't understand hard until you go do something insane called selection. Everything else is a downgrade from selection. And again, you can make it as hard as you want, but you'll never be testing yourself as hard as if I'm testing you on that day. So selection, if I'm running it, is going to be a whole lot different than if you're running your own selection. I hope that makes sense.
You know what I'd like to see actually is somehow you getting onto the show SAS Selection or something like that. One of the those selection TV shows where they put celebrities through stuff. I would love to see you as a directing staff on one of those. Man,
I when I was DS or directing staff during selections in Tier 1, I enjoyed it, man. And it's not that I enjoyed the punishment or the pain or the suffering or the tempo or anything. I loved observing the human mind. It's a fascinating place. Selection is something that can only be understood by being in it and then instructing on it. So you see both sides of the coin for the totality of the experience. And I wish everyone could do it. And I wish everyone could then see it done so that they could understand the fullness of how powerful that process is. And so, yeah, it'd be fun to be on one of these shows, of course, but I wouldn't accept it. It'd be fun, but I wouldn't do it because I've kind of learned what I need to learn in that process, and it would just be a repetition. I'd rather just hang out and podcast and learn things from Craig, even if he does finish, the show with a simple nope.
Didn't even need a pop filter on that one too. It worked out quite well. And to your point, Shaun, you would be teaching many people quite a lot of things. So it wouldn't just be for your benefit. It might be for the team.
Fair enough.
Just helping out, adding a little bit of uncomfortability to you. That's all good. So yeah, with that, Craig, really appreciate the conversation. This has been fantastic. Lots of information. And if you would kindly step out of my brain now and walk away. That way I can just move on. It has been fantastic. So, as I learn all about all kinds of things in my own brain and how I affected things, it allowed me to build into the person that I am today, which allows me to help everyone else out there grow into the people that they're meant to be. And you can do that with us every day on the collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.